there's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is Content Farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world. Ajde, majkata!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
So the school year starts, summer ends, but COVID remains, and not only that, but increases in Macedonia and around the world. And as all of that happens, Macedonia prepares to celebrate 30 years of independence as a modern-day nation-state, while Zoran Zaev says his government has, quote, strengthened, unquote, Macedonian identity, and his deputy prime minister, Artan Grubi, says that anyone who is against the Ohrid Framework Agreement, the Prespa Agreement, and the Treaty on so-called good neighborly relations with Bulgaria is, quote, against the state, unquote. This from a man who worships at the feet of another man, Ali Ahmeti, who actually fought against the Macedonian state. Of course, local elections are coming up next month, and there is a great deal of activity in the lead up to those elections. And Afghan refugees have now arrived in Macedonia. Remember, one of Macedonia's obligations to NATO is taking in refugees from places like Afghanistan, where Macedonian forces fought with NATO. And as Zaev never stops reminding everyone, NATO is the backbone of Macedonia's security and stability, just like it was in Afghanistan. We'll discuss all this and much more on this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains, which I can barely see because they're covered with clouds, in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Šelimanov in the foothills of the Hindu Kush of the Balkans. That is Vodna in Skopje, Macedonia.
I love it. I love it. That is fantastic.
For some reason, there was an Mi-24 attack helicopter, which we have a few, and we used. You remember certainly in the war of 2001, flying overhead above Skopje a few days ago. I don't know what it was doing. It's not used for fires, for the forest fires or anything like that. And it really felt for a moment like being in Kandahar.
And, of course, Kandahar was established by Alexander.
I did not know that. I had no idea.
Yeah.
I only read about this recently. Somebody was commenting on Twitter, and I never connected. I know that Iskandarun, when you see a city of that name, is Alexander's city, but I never figured that Kandahar is a corruption of Iskandarun or something.
Yeah, so fascinating. Just, here we are 2,300 years later.
Yeah.
This almost sounds like a Monty Python skit. Talking about Alexander and Afghanistan because it's still relevant 2,300 years later, which is odd. But anyway, today is September 1. We're recording on Wednesday, September 1. This is episode 121 of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. As I said, school starts now here in America. School starts whenever. Each school district in each county has its own rules and regulations and start times and dates and all that. But in Europe, school tends to start on September 1. Mm-hmm. So, Cvetin, did the kids go back to school today in person finally after a year and a half?
Weirdly, they did, and it's very strange because we have these horrific numbers. Like 1,000 people get infected each day, and about between 30 and 40 die each day. And this includes even young people. Like we had a 15-year-old die today, a 22-year-old yesterday. So people are seriously alarmed. And still the government insisted that unlike last year when 90% of the time we had online education, that this year we're going to have in-person classes for everybody. And then some cities rebelled, especially the Albanian cities, which have been walloped very hard. They were holding, they had this annual migration of Albanian gastarbeiter migrants in Germany and Switzerland coming to Macedonia all through the summer. And the government kept the borders open to help them come because they're very important to bring money to their villages. So June, July, we were packed with Albanians from all over Europe who did not necessarily bring the virus with them, but they would often hold like parties. They would buy rounds for everybody in the local tea shop. They would hold huge weddings. And if one person there is infected, it turns out that many get infected. So the western part of the country is especially hard hit. And so Tetovo, Gostivar, Debar, I think, Kičevo, Struga, they all rebelled. And there the high schools will not start with in-person classes. They will hold only online classes. The rest of the country, where it's calmer, predominantly Macedonian, everybody's supposed to go to school, but parents are given an opt-out to say, I don't want to send my children to school. I want to have them attend online class. So the teacher is expected to hold a real class, but also have a computer turned on and teach for the few children who remain at home. So this is what they're going to try and do. Teachers are livid. They insist that, they practically say, listen, we'll have somebody get infected in the first few days. It's a given. Considering how bad the numbers are, we have about 15,000 active cases, 1,000 people infected a day. So they say somebody will get infected and we'll shut down the school. Just give us a week until somebody gets tested, and we're sending everybody back home. But the government is pushing real hard on people to get vaccinated. So it first closed shopping malls and restaurants to the unvaccinated and to the lepers. And now it says that, okay, you don't have to be vaccinated if your child goes to school, but you really should consider it. And some parents whose children want to go to school are considering it. So this is now, school is a tool of pressuring parents to get vaccinated. So that's where we are.
Interesting. Yeah. Now, again, and I was listening to the editor's National Review podcast last night and talking about the great debates here on masking, and Charlie Cook mentioned, and he's in Florida, how it just seems, COVID itself just is so random. Oregon, which has some of the most restrictive rules in the country, the governor there, who is a zealot for masking, etc., has decreed that even if you're vaccinated, you have to wear a mask outside, which is just insanity times 10. Yeah. But my point is that, again, the data actually show, and I'm looking right now at a table from the Center for Disease Control from the U.S. government, under 18 and under, thankfully, again, since the start of this whole thing, 18 and under, children have not been hit hard. And here's the data. Out of 633,785 deaths in the United States of America to date, 470 have been under 18, 18 and under. 470 have died, which, of course, is a tragedy, et cetera, yes. But it doesn't affect children like it affects adults and those with comorbidities. So that's the good news. And it's then you have the debate on the other side, of course, and I'm sure it's raging in Macedonia, or at least I hope they're having this debate in Macedonia, that the keeping kids away from school and away from their peers and away from interaction and isolated at home, how much damage is that causing in their young lives as they are developing? Because we're having that debate here, and I think from everything that I have written and seen, it is enormous and probably much more and longer term than having them stay at home forever, it seems like, because it doesn't seem like now we have the new variants. We're supposed to say, you can't just say the Delta variant, you have to say the highly contagious Delta variant. At least that's what our friends, mostly on the left, like to say, et cetera, et cetera.
It's the ISIS-K of the COVID virus. The common strain.
Yes, and it's it's not a mortal enemy of regular COVID. So to put it in those terms. Anyway, so all right, so kids are going to go back one way or the other. Hopefully, of course, we're going into fall. This is September 1. We're going to go into fall, and people are going to be indoors more in the colder weather. And we know what happened last winter, fall and winter, et cetera. So we'll just follow this. I see that Macedonia now has new restrictions. You can't enter the country unless you're vaccinated or have a negative PCR test. Now, as you know, I was in Macedonia last month. I was in Estonia. When I flew to Europe, in order to get out of my country and into Europe, I had to show my vaccine card. To get out of Europe and into this country, nobody wanted to see my vaccine card. Everybody wanted to see my negative PCR test. Go figure. Yeah. What does the science say? I don't think the science knows what the science says anymore. So,
no. I don't know. We'll have a few more experiments other than the children. We'll have the census. ZAF insists that it begins in 3 days from now, I think.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, he's forcing public administration people now, since nobody volunteered for the job. He's now going to force temps who work in the public administration, who are anxious not to lose their jobs, to go door to door and canvass people, which that's the only people he could force to do this. And then we have elections in mid-October. Now, in both situations, people are very scared of allowing anybody inside their homes and sitting with them for like half an hour, and then these persons, it's usually a team, you can imagine, have been in like 15 other apartments before you, so it's very risky. I think there'll be an option to tell them, listen, I'm not talking to you, get outside in front of the building or in the yard if you're living in a house, and we can talk in the open. So that's going to be one option. But ZAF is really pressured by the Albanians to give them a very favorable census result. The Albanians have already counted all their diaspora online. So now, even if it's a low turnout census in Macedonia in person, if Macedonians don't open the doors, Albanians will be even happier, and ZAF will meet his obligation to his coalition partners. Similarly for the elections, low turnout elections in October with a horrible, COVID summer, COVID autumn preceding the elections is also good for ZAF. He had a good result in 2020 when I think under 50% of people voted. So he does well in a low turnout election. So yeah, these are going to be two major experiments in which we can also expect a flare-up, and we can expect the government's negligence over the summer, allowing all these weddings, all these celebrations, leading up to this huge spike to influence both these crucial events, both to give us a skewed census result again, and to help ZAF in the elections if the turnout is low.
Right. Census lasts, what, a month?
I think so, yeah.
And is there an option for people to fill it out online?
Only for the diaspora. So locals, people living in Macedonia, have to do it in person. And, it's a completely bonkers situation. And even Macedonians in the diaspora largely ignored the census in April when it started. So, Albanians, on the other hand, gleefully, massively registered. You could see pictures in a mosque somewhere in Switzerland, like a person holding 20 passports on a laptop, typing up the numbers, and who knows if these people are actually alive or anything. So Wimmer is saying, listen, we don't need to do a census. We can do an electronic census that counts, looks into data from banks, who has an active bank account, withdraws money, puts money in, looks into the healthcare insurance forms, who goes to a doctor, who, receives money for, pays retirement taxes, or receives a retirement income and picks it up in the country. Border crossing data. You can actually have a pretty good picture of who actually lives in the country or not electronically. So Wimmer says we've been doing this for years, since 2011 when we gave up on the last census, when the Albanians tried to pull the same trick and Gruevski said, no way, we can't count your diaspora as residents. Since then, we've been doing electronic censuses. And Wimmer says, let's do it again. But ZAF has this huge obligation to the Albanian parties to give them favorable numbers and demands that we do an in-person census.
Well, looks like you're going to have to wait another 10 years to get an actual, real, proper census. I think most of our listeners would understand and know that the point of a census is to count the number of people who are in country at a given moment, not to count the number of people who are outside of the country. So with all due respect to the diaspora, they're not in the country. Now that's both Macedonians and the other ethnic minorities who are part of Macedonia but outside of Macedonia at the time. So, yeah, anyway, that's kind of depressing, and we know what the Albanians are going to do with it. All right, so let's move on to the elections, because we have local elections. October 17 is the election date. This is for the for mayors and city councils, etc. What is the latest prognosis? I see within Citizen they seem to have a lot of angst, and they're Zoran Zaev is telling current mayors that they need to step aside and new ones come on board. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the moment it's not looking good for SDSM. They have this major split, and they practically fired like a dozen of their top mayors at the moment. Or let's say half a dozen.
Yeah.
Let's say half a dozen. They're not re-nominating them. They're not letting them run again for a second term. And they sacked like the guy in Kumanova. He's splitting the ticket, so he's running independently. He used to fight all the time with Zaev, accusing him of being a sellout to the Albanians, to the Greeks, to the Bulgarians especially. Kumanova is like a more pro-Serbian city, and also of abandoning the city during the worst days of COVID last year. So he was not going to be renominated. The Interior Minister Oliver Spasovski is also from Kumanova. He wants one of his cousins to run. So the mayor, Maxim Dimitrievski, he said, "Screw you, I'm running independently," which splits the SDSM vote and could help Vomero in the race. So it's a major city. SDSM has held it since, even during the Vomero times of Gruevski, SDSM still managed to hold on to the city, to hold on to Kumanova. They appear scared in Strumica. They're sending Zaev loyalist Kostadin Kostadinov, who is the spokesman of the party. They're sending a very high-profile member of parliament to run for mayor there. So it seems that even in the home field, Zaev is not very comfortable. Another mayor, Debarca, it's a rural place north of Ohrid, is running independently after it was seen that he will not be appointed again. So they fired the lady in Bitola and Stefan Bogoev in Karposh. They were both involved in the racket scandal. They were questioned but not interrogated, not charged over the scandal when they were practically selling out state-owned land to Boki 13 for this criminal scheme to build like retirement homes, take government money for them, for the homes, and then sell it, privatize it and sell it for profit. So these two mayors, high-profile mayors, were involved in this scandal, which, the biggest scandal of Zaev's term in office, and they are not being nominated again. We'll see how this affects the elections in Bitola. Just north of Bitola in Prilep, they're not nominating the mayor again. They're sending a former government minister into the city. So another case of a high-profile official being sent by Zaev from Skopje back to his hometown to run for mayor. In Skopje, they fired also the mayors of Aerodrom, the mayor of Cintar, which are key districts. Especially in Aerodrom, there is a strong Vomero component and a lot of independent-minded people. So they practically were in the clear that they're going to lose the municipality. So they're removing the incumbent mayor. And we'll see if, these people now who are being fired, if they pull back on their loyalists, their inner circle of people, if they refuse to help the new candidate from the party in the race. This could help the Vomero candidates. And Levitz is also trying to run. They're nominating a former bass player for from a rock group, Memoria, Petar Georgievsky for mayor of Skopje. But VMRO is also coming out with an independent, interesting candidate, a woman businessman called Daniela Arsovska. She ran like the smaller of the two main chambers of commerce. So she's not a VMRO candidate. She's kind of like an interesting person, often critical of the government, but also, seen as fair-minded and a high-profile female candidate. So VMRO is aggressive in some of these races, like with this nomination. They have interesting candidates in the more secure municipalities in Skopje, like Butel. They're running this guy, this taekwondo coach whose student just won the silver medal in Tokyo, in the Tokyo Olympics. So at the moment it seems that SDSM are scared, are concerned about the outcomes of some key races, and that they are quickly trying to replace their candidates, while VMRO seem insurgent, and also, possibly most importantly, after Zaev made a coalition with DUI to support each other in the race, and also with a DUI rival, BISA. So Zaev is trying to balance between the two Albanian parties in his coalition, who are fighting in some areas, like in Tetovo, but they will nominally support each other. We'll see how, with how much vigor. VMRO then made an offer to Levica for a coalition. Levica refused, and then VMRO said, okay, we are forming a coalition with the Albanian opposition parties. So now both VMRO and SDSM have an Albanian partner, and this should help VMRO negate SDSM's advantage with having Albanian voters, so SDSM loses the race among the Macedonian voters, but whether it's a national race for president, for parliament, or if it's a local race in a municipality with Albanians, SDSM turns to the Albanians to make up the losses among the Macedonians with Albanian votes. Now, VMRO also has an Albanian partner, and this should make it a more even race in Skopje, in Kumanovo as well. And the way these races work is, so DUI and the Albanian opposition parties, like the Alliance and the Alternative, DUI will support SDSM, the Alliance and Alternative will support VMRO in the race in Skopje, in the race in Butel, which is a part of Skopje, which is largely Macedonian but has Albanians, in Kumanovo, which I said is divided. And in exchange, these parties will expect VMRO or SDSM support in places which are majority Albanian, that is Tetovo, Gostivar, and then we have the two difficult cases of Struga and Kičava. These are majority Albanian, but a Macedonian could plausibly win. So we're still not sure whether VMRO will run candidates in Struga and Kičavo, or if this will be part of their coalition agreement to try to help the Alliance and Alternative win these two cities. One of them is very important to the Alliance guys, to Ziadin Sela, that's Struga. And in exchange, try to get the head of the council of the municipality, more council members, to protect Macedonian interests in these cities. So this is how the arrangements are going to work. DUI is larger than the Alliance. Right. DUI should still give some advantage to SDSM in the races in Skopje and Kumanovo, but now VMRO have a fighting chance. They will not lose the Albanian vote like 100-0. It might be like 60-40 or 70-30. So they have a better chance to win Skopje.
Interesting. That is a very good rundown. Appreciate it. I think our listeners will appreciate it. Are there any polls out?
There was one poll from NDI which surprised people. It had VMRO leading SDSM by 5 points. It was still like very few people said they're going to vote. Like 30% said no, 15% said I'm not going to vote, 30% said like I don't want to tell you or something.
Yeah.
And then VMRO had like 15%, SDSM had 10. So it was a very bad poll for SDSM, especially coming from NDI, which is practically their friendly outfit. And then DUI had like 5%, so then DUI and SDSM together should be even with VMRO in the local race, but now the Alliance and Alternative had like 3 or 4%, so now VMRO is again in a solid lead. But then SDSM has the power of incumbency in practically all municipalities across the country. They won extremely heavily in 2017.
Yeah.
The elections were just after the incident in the parliament, and the US and the EU strongly taking the side of SDSM, practically, completing the coup which started with the colored revolution. So a lot of fraud was apparently involved in briberies and police pressure on VMRO activists on the ground. So SDSM holds practically all municipalities in the country. One municipality which VMRO held is Kavadarci. A businessman there, Miko, then quickly cut a deal with Zaev, was, visited by Philip Ricker, and then shortly afterwards, even the one city which VMRO won in 2017, even that mayor switched sides, joined Zaev, openly supported the name change, said he's going to challenge Mickovsky for leader of VMRO. But now, this time around, Yanchev said, okay, I'm coming back to VMRO, and he apparently had a meeting with Mickovsky, and they buried the hatches, and now he's going to be supported by VMRO. So this is another indication that a person who was attuned to what the embassy is thinking and how things are developing in the country, he is now moving back into the VMRO fold. Not everybody is happy about it, but it's indicative that Zaev is losing serious candidates, and the weather vanes are siding with VMRO at the moment.
All right. Well, that's as I was listening to you go back and forth between all that, I was thinking to myself, clear as mud. No, you've done a good job of explaining it, but it is a bit Byzantine, shall we say?
This is a podcast for people with more advanced knowledge of Macedonia. It's not an introductory, your starter podcast on Macedonian affairs.
Yeah, well, all right. Well, we'll just have to keep monitoring that, looking at it. You mentioned, of course, the influence of my government, the State Department, and our various ambassadors who have come through and done damage to Macedonia. I noticed that I don't know where Kate is, our current ambassador. She hasn't tweeted for a while, and I know the DCM there's a new DCM there. I keep thinking maybe she resigned and just didn't tell anybody, and they're afraid to tell everybody, but we'll see. I do note that President Biden yesterday, in his capitulation speech to the nation about Afghanistan, said regarding Afghanistan and our fleeing or evacuation, said it's about ending an era of major military operations to remake other countries. So the good news, Cvetin, is that we're not going to use our military to remake your country. The bad news is we're still going to use our State Department to remake Macedonia.
I'm not sure what's deadlier or more damaging to a country. The NGOs you sent there.
The State Department, definitely. The NGOs military, and the State Department. People like, what's that idiot's name? Petit Saracini at the Civil?
People like that. Yeah, Peter Saracini.
Sorry?
Yeah, Peter Saracini.
No, I'm going to call him Petit Saracini.
Oh, so, okay.
It was kind of funny. This is a total aside, but he just ripped into me the other week on Twitter using all kinds of foul language, and he works for an organization called Civil. I thought that was quite odd.
Exactly. He was on going cold turkey, maybe.
He was on what?
Yeah, he was probably going cold turkey.
Yeah.
He was waiting for his delivery from Afghanistan.
He was off his meds.
And we got our delivery from Afghanistan.
You did, yes. That's a nice segue. Nice segue, yes. So Macedonia has received the first of, I don't know how many refugees Zoran Zaev promised to take. I mean, as a NATO member, you have obligations. You fought alongside with NATO. They finally let you in the tent, so that you no longer had to be outside the tent pissing in, but now you can be inside the tent pissing in.
Pissing in, yeah.
But as one of your obligations, you have to take refugees. Now, it's what's the number that you actually have versus how many are coming in? Do you know?
We have 750, and these were NDI people, apparently Transparency International people. Like the Afghan versions of these loathsome characters, we have like Petit Saracini here, working for the US government in these NGO positions. And Zaev said he would take up to 1,800. We are putting them in hotels across the city. There was this strange comment from Glenn Beck who said that our ambassador was invited by the State Department, apparently told to stop accepting refugees, or maybe he wasn't sure, he wasn't explaining it well, or I'm not sure if he understood it correctly what's happening, but perhaps, we were being told, listen, tone it down, you can just take so many people in your country before some actual terrorist slips through and actually shoots up somebody, and then we're all in trouble. Mm-hmm. But we're pledging, we have agreed, and we have the names of 750 people, and have pledged up to 1,800 in total. 149 arrived. One lady immediately gave birth, so now we have 150. Yeah.
They're multiplying like rabbits.
We have the first Afghan Macedonian baby.
Does that baby get automatic citizenship?
Under one of the versions of the law which the Albanian parties were pushing on Zaev, he would have. But it didn't pass. So at the moment, it's not. It didn't go that far.
There's a technical term for that. Obviously, if you're born here in the United States, you're automatically a citizen, no matter what. But I forgot.
The Latin term is jus soli.
Yes.
It's by the law of the land, or the jus genus or sanguis, by the law of the blood or the family. So if your family are Americans, you're American wherever you're born. If it's jus soli, then if you're born in the soil, then you're. We were going to call it the jus orce, because Orce Kamchev has this large clinic. Sistina, and half of Kosovo people are born in Macedonia, coming to Sistina because their healthcare system is still in shambles. So under one version of the law, which the Albanian parties were pushing on Zaev, they demanded he makes changes to the citizenship law. We would have had, like, half of Kosovo would have a plausible claim on Macedonian citizenship born in this one clinic in Skopje.
Yeah, that's funny. Well, while we're on the subject of Afghan refugees and the disaster that was, or is, I should say, it's still unfolding, our hasty retreat and evacuation from Afghanistan, leaving American citizens behind, not to mention green card holders.
The dogs. And the
Sorry?
dogs. And the dogs.
And the dogs, yes, and the dogs, and other allies, etc. I'm reminded of the President Biden said it was the largest airlift in history. Probably true, airlift, yes, but of course Dunkirk, which I think is the defining example, was about 350,000 troops under fire. Yeah. Mostly by private craft, shallow water craft, private yachts that with Churchill as prime minister sent over, and it was a miracle. But here's the key thing, is Churchill said, and I don't have the exact quote, but Churchill said it was a colossal military disaster. That part's a quote. And he said that evacuation is not something to celebrate. Now, Biden the other day, yesterday, actually, it was his press conference on Tuesday, the 31st of August, framed it as a absolute and total success, blamed, first of all, Donald Trump at least 4 times by my count, blamed the Afghan army, which we, the United States military, withdrew our support from earlier this summer, so they couldn't possibly fight without the support that we had in there. He blamed everybody, but he said the buck stops with me, and then he blamed everybody else. I mean, Joe Biden, and I don't think he's going to, this is not going to, he thinks that, and his advisors, Jen Psaki and all the other idiots at the White House, Jake Sullivan, etc., and not to mention Kamala Cackle Harris, the vice president, all think that this is going to blow over. The media is going to move on to COVID and whatever else.
And they will.
No, I don't think so. I really don't think so. But watching some of these veteran media people like Richard Engel with CNN and Peter Alexander with NBC and some others, they're asking really tough questions, and I can tell just by reading them and looking at their TV comments, they're pissed off. Everybody's pissed off. This is not going to end well for Joe Biden, who is non compos mentis. I think that's clear by now. Not going to end well for Kamala Harris. I think the Democrats are really worried about this. Of course, we have our own, I guess you would call them by-elections coming up, the Virginia race for governor in November and some others. We have the California recall actually in 13 days, September 14, Governor Newsom. Larry Elder, I am so hoping, most of our listeners probably don't know Larry Elder. I hope they do. He's a conservative author, broadcaster, and he is black. And he is leading the race right now to replace Governor Newsom, if Governor Newsom is recalled in California. To have a black conservative Republican as governor of the nation's largest state would be so delicious. and it will send shockwaves through the Democrat Party and the left and the progressives, etc. So, but going back to Afghanistan, of course, this is a colossal failure of not only the United States government, the State Department, and not our military, but the senior military leadership, like General Milley, and for NATO. And our NATO allies are pissed off at Joe Biden for this, and the State Department and others. And my question to you is there any discussion in Macedonia about this whole debacle and how that affects Macedonia's membership in NATO? Because, as Zoran Zaev keeps reminding everybody, NATO is the backbone of Macedonia's security and stability.
Yeah. I mean, we're not concerned about NATO, other than wry comments that we have to buy American APCs. Well, the Afghans got them for free. There was jubilation, obviously, initially, that these NGO types, it's not just the collapse of the US military, it's the collapse of the nation building model, which was run by these types who were, as we were commenting days before the Taliban takeover, pushing the LGBT flag on the country and gender studies. I mean, I'm all for advancing Afghanistan from the 7th century into, let's say, the 19th, hopefully 20th century in terms of gender relations, maybe. But these people were trying to propel it right into an imagined version of the 21st century, into 21st century Berkeley, not just the 21st century, skipping centuries of development in the process. So it's a huge defeat for them. They're literally the types of people who are fleeing now the country in helicopters, and not to gloat on the personal misfortune, but I'm definitely going to gloat about the defeat of the ideology and the ideologues in Washington who cooked this all up and were unable, with so much money, so much goodwill from the entire world, so much military support from the entire world, from the US, of course. They were unable to have a realistic plan for how to cobble together a country, and they're now suffering a humongous defeat. This is not a successful evacuation. It's not the Berlin airlift. The Berlin airlift was done to shore up a city in the middle of enemy territory and not to surrender, and to prove that, eventually leading to a huge victory when the other side of the wall begged to be allowed inside Berlin. This is evacuation. This is just Biden is bragging with how quickly the American soldiers and diplomats fled from the city. This is ridiculous to portray it as a victory. And a lot of people here are, obviously this was a conservative country. This is a conservative country. It was led by a conservative party, which was dislodged from power through tremendous investment and effort on the part of the US government. And we are obviously constantly gouging and looking into how extensively the US still supports Zaev in power. Like I mentioned, this mayor who began a challenge of Mitskovsky's position in the party after being visited by Ricker and Palmer. So these things we constantly keep an eye on, and any weakness on the part of the US in the region, like they shore up a person in Armenia, then he loses a war, like a colored revolution candidate. They shore up a colored revolution regime in Ukraine, and then the US does not support them enough or is unable to support them against Russia, to some extent to defend their country. They're all helped in supporting some parts of the country, not retaking the rest. So which Albanian politician is being welcomed in DC. So we constantly keep an eye on these things, and any type of weakness on the part of the US and the administration, which we believe is going to be very Balkan focused, very experienced people in the Balkans. Listeners remember how depressing our January, February podcasts were, or November, December, when Biden won. We practically, we were counting down the months Macedonia has left us as a unified country. Biden has been a huge supporter of the Albanian aggressive cause in the Balkans. But if he's not all there, and if they're unable to see through another huge investment on the part of the military industrial intelligence, whatever you want to call it, complex, who knows, maybe the US does not them as it used to, and maybe we now have a chance to roll back some of the damage the US has done to Macedonia. We'll see in the elections. We'll see how things develop.
Yeah, indeed. I think the biggest takeaway, I think, from the debacle in Afghanistan is that people, especially in the Democrat Party and those that carry water for the Democrat Party in the media and think tanks and Hollywood, etc., said that Joe Biden was a foreign policy expert. Obviously, he is not. He's never been, and he's never, he's always been in the center of the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party has moved far to the left, and so, and that's what he is. Plus the fact that he's 78 years old, 79 in November, I believe, non-compos mentis. So, and what that does to our role in the world, we'll have to wait and see. Let's see, we're running a little bit long. Why don't we'll need to wrap this up. I have to get to the office. It's morning here, it's evening there. But as I mentioned in the monologue, of course, we've got Macedonia's Independence Day next week, September 8th, which I believe is Wednesday? Yes.
I'm barely aware which month it is, but
yes, it's Wednesday.
If it weren't September 1st, I wouldn't know it.
Yeah,
it's Wednesday.
Wednesday, 30 years of independence of Macedonia as a modern-day nation-state. I don't know if we'll do a podcast before that or on that day or after that, but we will. We should wish all our listeners, and especially Macedonians in Macedonia, in the region, and around the world, a very happy Independence Day. Remember what has been done in terms of the change of the name, etc., at least at the official level, can always be undone. And that's what we are working towards, no matter what.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. No matter what Phil Reeker and Matt Palmer and Kate Burns and all those other morons have to say.
Hear, hear.
All right. Happy Independence Day, and we'll talk next week.
Absolutely. Take care, buddy.
You too.